Are you ready, kids?
I can't hear you. Oh my goodness.
Oh, wow. Welcome to Geeks Grounds, everybody. I just kind of started. I was going to ask if you were ready, and the captain took over my soul.
I was like, you know what's funny? I was thinking about that as an intro, and I was like, no, like I shouldn't do it.
This is why we have a podcast.
This is why we're friends and we have a podcast, is because we sometimes share moods.
We do. Welcome to Geeks and Grounds,
Welcome
everyone.
to Geeks and Grounds, everybody.
This is a monthly game club where we play games and brew good conversation together as a community, and we're so excited to be introing the latest dev interview with our Game of the Month selection, Dredge.
The Dredge team has been incredible to get into have a conversation with.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to hear from Joel, the programmer writer, Mikey, the 3D artist animator, Alex, the lead artist creative director. Just a really incredible group of people. You're going to be blown away by the chemistry of these three. Like, very
Absolutely.
funny, great stories. You can tell they've got a real close connection with each other.
Yeah, we had a really quick shout out also to Nadia, their producer, who helped arrange and schedule everything on the back end so we could have this conversation. They are absolutely just a wonderful team. We had as Joel said, a great conversation with them about Dredge as a game, but also about the process of creating it. What was it like to develop a first game? This is their debut together. It's astounding that this is their first title as a team together. A little bit of context, their studio Black Salt Games is based in New Zealand, and they released this game to wide positive reception. I think on Steam it's overwhelmingly positive. They have so many reviews, which is really outstanding, especially for an indie. And we're going to be talking about how they created the mechanics, how they were inspired and drew in so many different elements of horror that we've been discussing as a community, like tension and atmosphere and vibes. We talk a lot about vibes.
Lots of talks about vibes. In fact, you might say this is a very vibe-centric game. Honestly, like the responses and the thoughts, the way that they went about creating this game, it's unlike anything that I have really heard or experienced in really any form of creation. It was just really cool to hear about.
Yeah, so sit back. Unlike some of our other conversations with the developers, this is largely a spoiler-free episode. We do not discuss the narrative. So if you have been really itching to avoid spoilers, we talk about mechanics, we talk a little bit about what you may encounter as you're exploring, but we don't really get into specifics on the story. So you can go into this knowing that if you haven't finished the game, you are okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing you will need in order to finish this podcast is a nice little drink, hopefully, or snack of your choosing.
Yeah.
This is Geeks and Grounds after all. So I've got my little good time cat mug. It looks like a little fish mug, or like it's like a milk carton with a little fish on the handle here.
Shout out to Sarah who got me this mug. I adore it.
we love mug talk here.
We do. And I have my there are chickens on both sides. I have my chicken mug.
Well, cheers.
Cheers. Welcome to the team from Black Salt Games. It's really good to have you here. How are y'all doing this? It looks like daytime for you. Morning, I think.
It is daytime. It's 9 a.m. for us here in New Zealand.
Yeah. Start of the day. Yeah.
Yep. Literal opposite sides, I feel like, from the world from us here in Portland, Oregon. Before we get started, I'd love to have you just go down the list. You're sitting on a very comfortable looking couch in your new space. Introduce who you are and maybe your role on the team.
Cool. Hi, my name is Joel Mason, and I was the programmer and writer on Dredge.
My name is Alex Ritchie, and I'm the lead artist on Dredge.
And I'm Michael Bestians, also known as just Mikey, and I'm a 3D artist and animator on Dredge.
Awesome. Really, really lovely to have you all here. First, just to jumpstart the conversation, it has been a wild month and some change for you all. What has that been like, launching the game?
I mean, there's been a lot of interviews, a lot of planning as well for the future of Dredge. I mean, we didn't sort of anticipate such a huge reception to the game. So there's a lot of like listening to the community and seeing what they're saying, seeing what they're asking for. And yeah, it's just been really busy.
Yeah, it's been pretty crazy. Getting to see all of the streamers and that I watch all of the time play Dredge is pretty surreal. It's cool.
Yeah, just people coming from like all aspects of the entertainment industry and just like board game sort of stuff. Like, I got ideas for this, I got ideas for this. And then it's been pretty fun hearing all these really cool ideas and everything coming through.
Oh, that's so cool. Board game is like, that would be so
fascinating.
cool. I'm trying to think of like how you even like tabletop it, essentially.
Yeah, right. Oh, wow. And you, I mean, talk about being receptive to your audience. You just released a big update for the game, and I think the last week, was it 1 week ago?
About a week
About ago, our time. And so, like, incredible quality of life improvements. So how just generally, like, was a lot of that in response to watching people play the game? And you're like, oh, like this could be a thing we could tweak here and there.
Yeah, there's kind of a mixture of things that come up that we didn't expect from seeing people play the game, and then things that we'd sort of thought, oh yeah, that might be an issue in the future. So yeah, we sort of combined a whole bunch of things, and yeah, we just wanted to make the game better for people. You know, removing some pain points, removing some frustrating things, and you know, just tweaking things to make it better.
Yeah, I will say one of the updates was the removal of the timer for some of the side quests, and I very much appreciated that.
That was a really wild one. For us, I don't think we really anticipated the amount of frustration that those timed quests would cause people. But I mean, I've seen comments of people saying, you know, I was 8 hours into my playthrough and I failed a quest and I wanted to restart. And that's not the experience we wanted people to have. We never saw it as a thing that like should be that frustrating. So yeah, we wanted to remove that.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want them to be frustrating, but we thought the whole time, because they're optional, that it might not be as bigger of a thing. But people really want to see all of the all of the things. Yeah.
Yeah. I was curious because you mentioned like failure is in that respect wasn't an experience you wanted players to have. What were some of the key words or key like experience points you did want for players as you developed the game?
I guess one of the key areas just in general is the vibe of the game. And vibe is a pretty nebulous word, right? But it encompasses, in Dredge, it's a whole lot of things like tension and suspense and sinister. So those were really, really important things. And then like the drive to push your luck and sort of go further, go out later at night. Those were all sort of key experience factors for us.
Yeah, feeding the inner human magpie, I guess, was pretty good to kind of dealing with things when it was like, oh, here's something shiny, and then just tempting them out to go kind of push their own sort of boundaries, I think was pretty cool. And also just coming across the unexpected and then trying to make as many of those sort of experiences fresh and kind of frequent throughout the game so that there's always something kind of like, oh, that's new, that's different, I wasn't expecting that. And I think trying to keep that going for as long as we did was pretty important to us, I think.
Feeding the magpie is such a good line and way of thinking about it. And as soon as you said it, I was like, that's exactly what happened. Like, there's so many instances where I was about to dock or say, I'm going to go sleep for the night, but then I'd see something shiny and it was just close enough.
It's just close enough.
You're like, well, maybe today I'll just give it a shot. So that's a wonderful way to describe it.
Also, like the idea of pushing your luck. I am such a conservative game player where it's like I will always play like the sneaky rogue that's going to shoot people from far away. I'm so conflict averse. And I remember the first time that I was forced to stay out late, and like the way my stomach just clenched. It was such an effective job of like building that tension and like no excuse. Like you have to dive in at some point here. What was the experience like kind of creating that tension?
It was tricky, right? Because you get a lot of different play styles and we wanted to leave it really open to different types of players. You get people who are really risk averse and who sleep every night basically and sort of have this completely different experience of the game as those that never sleep and just go out when they're fully panicked, and they see an entirely different side of the game. So
I can't even fathom doing that. Like, I would go to bed at like 10 a.m. sometimes because it was like, oh, well, it's not worth the risk. I'll just go, I'll go out tomorrow.
I still remember when we had like the first few people play through the entirety of the game way before release, and one of them slept every night, and one of them I don't think slept at all. So yeah, ensuring that the balance of the game still worked out for those two different playthroughs was a challenge.
I feel like what was super interesting as a player is I usually am quite, especially when a game bills itself as horror, I'm like, okay, so I'm definitely gonna like dip my toes, but maybe not jump into the pool, so to speak. But it is interesting that that idea of pushing your luck, I got more confident as the game went on, and the way the progression worked, it felt very much like I could push my luck as I started building out and expanding my ship and getting to know the area, which was really, really cool.
Yeah, that's a really great point. One of the things that you did that builds tension is like just the idea of the eye, the symbol that like things are panicky with at your top display there, the eyes that pop up in the sea. What can you talk a little bit about like the inspiration for the eyes? Where did that come from?
I'm not sure. It seems it's a really good. It's like the symbolism of being like panicky seemed really good to us, and we always wanted that kind of the indication of your mental state in the game to be vague, sort of vague, so that like interpreting it is also a little bit like uneasy for the player. That seemed to be a pretty good like cohesive thing.
Yeah, I think we also didn't want to go with the like brain icon that a lot of games do, where they like shrivel the brain the more panicked you get, and yeah, the eye was just a really cool motif.
Yeah, because it also tied in because I think early on people were like, when we did it through a bunch of playtesting, they were like, is that my panic meter, is it a sanity meter? They weren't quite sure what it was actually trying to represent. Is it my tidiness meter? But they always managed to describe like the implications of when it's open or when it's like flashing and stuff like that anyway. So for us, that was all that really mattered, because it just tied in really well with keeping things kind of vague and kind of like, oh, what's actually going on? That's different. Why is it changing like that? But everyone knew that if it's open, then bad things might happen. And then so I think even now we haven't really 100% settled on what the actual official lore name of that sort of...
It's Panic. We did end up putting a tutorial behind it because people felt like they needed to understand it more. But yeah, as Mikey was saying, most people understand it instinctively, even if they can't put a name to it.
Well, it's interesting because it's a subtle tie between both your character's state and that like there is something else external to you out there, and it's got its eye open, like it's 3 a.m. and something is awake.
Yes.
And at the same time, like you're right, like this idea of like it is your mental state. I think it was I was just a few hours into the game before I realized it wasn't just something is awake, but it also said something about me. It's just like a really interesting way to like make me feel more tied into the experience as like the player and character.
And I think what was really cool is it almost fed off of, like, I fed off of the eye, and then the more I fed off, it was this sort of circular dynamic that I had with it, because when I noticed it was panicking and like the eye was moving about a bit more, things started getting a little bit more red and feeling more oppressive. I started, even if nothing was happening, I would start to say, okay, maybe I should be panicking, like something should be going wrong. And that ability to build tension even when nothing is happening in the moment, that's obvious to you as the player, was so cool. One thing that I really love though is you bring up so much tension in the player, but then there are moments where you're able to release it, because that dynamic of being able to just let it go is really significant and allows you to feel the tension even more so. Through the fishing, which is super relaxing. And so I'm curious, how did you think about the dynamic of that rubber band of like bringing up the tension and then allowing players to relax so that they can have their next moment of being scared?
I guess it factors pretty significantly into the day-night cycle, right? And when we started designing Dredge, we wanted to make what I'll describe as a game of two halves. We looked at games like Moonlighter that have one half which is like a sort of a dungeon roguelite experience, and then you have a shop management half to it. And we sort of wanted to recreate a thing that had two distinct parts, that had two distinct feelings. And so the day-night cycle was a big part of that, allowing the day to basically wash it all away, essentially, because you basically don't drain you don't increase your panic during the daytime, and we don't we don't charge you to cleanse your panic. You can sleep at any time, and it sort of all goes away. We allow players to sort of choose how much they want to opt in to the panic system and how much they want to go out at night. It was a matter of making sure that it was all flexible for players.
A lot of playtesting went into it, because I know we were really making sure that, I think, how many times did we end up changing the actual time that you would be out during the day and night, and the length of those different cycles? Because then we get a lot of people saying the night's too short or the night's too long, and so trying to figure out that nice balance of okay, maybe we need to change up those sort of times, and then the speed that you're trying to get from point A to point B as well. Because I think we did a lot of work on okay, we want people at this point of the game to only just be able to get to this place during the day, or if they go any earlier, then they're likely going to get caught out at night. And then so it's slowly trying to build up that sort of thing. So it's slowly easing people into those kind of states of tension at certain times throughout the game.
That was the spacing between areas was masterfully done.
Yes.
Because it was, especially at the beginning of the game, you can't go anywhere really there and back in one day. And so you do feel that conflict of saying, okay, do I push through? Do I try to go at night? Do I play it super conservative and sleep every time I find a dock? And so the ability to create tension just by space in that way was super cool. Very well done.
Yeah, I think one of the big players in that equation is the water itself, right? The psychological impact of just having this unknown space underneath you in the dark does a lot of heavy lifting in those voyages out into the deep.
And then also, I think balancing that with the agency that you give the player, that it's your decision which island cluster you're going to and how long you're going to stay out, and if you're going to go straight to a place that you can dock or not. And it's almost like there is so much responsibility that the accountability equation is again, just really masterfully done, because it's well, you made the choice to do this, and now your ship is going to be attacked by a tentacle monster, and I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, and from what is it, day one in the game, you can, I think, pretty much go anywhere in the map, which is wonderfully intimidating. I feel like. Did you set out with that intention from the jump?
Yeah, pretty much. I think we took a lot of inspiration from Breath of the Wild there.
Very fitting
where
reference.
You can do each of the divine beasts in any order in that game, and we just liked that agency that players could have. There is this kind of weird, I don't know if it's a human psychology thing, but a good chunk of players end up going to the final zone quite early on. Because as you sort of leave the starting area, it's off to your left, and maybe humans have a tendency to go to the left. I don't know. And there was a time where that was really common, because in the distance you could see this sort of large mountains of this area, and we ended up putting some islands in the way so that you didn't see it as much. But yeah, we always tried to keep things as open as possible so that people could do things in any order.
Yeah, it means if you get stuck doing one thing or you're bored of one thing, you can go and do other things, and you've always got multiple things on your mind as well, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was gonna maybe change topics just slightly to talk about the art style of the game, which was immediately gripping. For those that have not yet played the game, would you be able to kind of describe some of the visual elements that you guys pulled off as a part of this?
Jeez, how do you describe it? It's a heavily stylized game for starters. We've kind of used, for the most part, pretty muted colors. except for in some cases like the sunrises and whatnot. But the main distinctive factor of the art is just having these hard edges everywhere. It's a pretty harsh cartoony style, which is a juxtaposition you don't often see. You might see similar stuff in what you would call low poly games, and we took like great inspiration from that look. But then we also tried to carry that over into the 2D art as well, like in the characters, and make it more cohesive. And I think combining the harshness with the cartooniness was a great complement to the gameplay of, like cozy horror. It's got both those elements.
Yeah, there's almost like a... it's like the gruffness that I associate with like my dad. I don't know how to describe it. Like the harshness of the shape of the knuckles or the outlines of the characters. It's like it has that certain amount of like grittiness to it. That I hadn't thought about how like the juxtaposition of that harshness with kind of like the softness of the water and the way the light works in the game. But that's a really an incredible accomplishment to be able to just put those two things together in such an effective way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is also a weird analogy, but it felt very salty. Like
Yes.
I don't know how else to describe it, but you see these characters and, I have never really, I didn't live my life on the coast or in a fishing town, but it felt very salty, and I really have no other way to describe it.
Yeah, I think that the whole, everyone looks like they've just been battered by the storm, so they're all pretty weathered and everything as well. So it's here's some nice, colorful, bright scenes at the start of the game, and you see the characters, and I think they're just I think he's happy, but he's not really that happy. And then most of the other characters are all kind of low, kind of grim and glum. And then a lot of the kind of writing that kind of went in behind those things also kind of reflects that sort of thing as well, where they're all kind of yeah, things are kind of rough here.
Yeah, it was a challenge to come up with the fifth slightly different type of gruff character. Yeah,
and a lot of them have really very neutral expressions, which is kind of it lets you put you get to project your own kind of emotions onto them. So if you're happier in the middle of the day, you can almost imagine that this neutral expression is them being a little bit happier, and then when you've just had a tough experience, you come in and you see the same expression and you project more panic onto it, and that kind of works as well.
Yeah, there's only one young person, I guess, in the game as well, where everyone else kind of feels it's like my parents.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel a bit dried out and weathered and beaten, jerky in some kind of ways.
Like jerky,
yeah,
yes.
I don't know, this is probably not the most, you don't want to connect jerky to that. But yeah, everyone was just withered. I loved the juxtaposition between the low poly and sort of the detail that you got with the illustration, though, and the character portraits. They played off one another really well, I thought. And then the personality that came in with the corrupted fish and these sort of abominations that you drop from the depths. I was curious because those felt much more almost like those encyclopedic nature diagrams of fish, a little bit more realistic, even though they were definitely fantastical. And I'm curious how you came up with all of the variations visually for these fish.
It's a bit of it's I guess from the art side, if we're starting with art first, which we normally do, it's just a bit of stream of consciousness. You just throw ideas down there out and you just mix things up and see what weird stuff you can make. Whenever I would have trouble coming up with art for the aberrations, I would just come back and ask these guys and get some new weird ideas to try out.
Yeah, the more outrageous the idea, the more kind of interesting sort of weird shapes you kind of ended up with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was there any that you had to leave on the cutting room floor because they were too bizarre or too weird or didn't make any sense?
I remember there was one that you almost left on the cutting room floor, which was the collapsed viper fish, which is an aberration of the viper fish. That is this kind of distorted mess of flesh,
it's
basically.
Inside Out.
Yeah, and you're here's the real aberration, and then I've got this other one as well. I don't like it. And I said, no, it's amazing, because it sort of communicates this thing that's been pulled up to the surface, and that there's a pressure change, and weird things happen to fish when they get pulled up from the deep. And yeah, we put it in.
Yeah, there's other ones that I've made that kind of trigger a bit of trypophobia, if that's how you say it. If you know what that is, maybe be careful Googling it. But it's
the fear of holes.
Yeah, things that have holes in them that shouldn't. Yeah, and every time I've done a couple fish like that, and I'm like, this is kind of gross to me.
There are a few pieces of art and models in the game that still make me feel uncomfortable when I look at them, and I've looked at them dozens and dozens of times.
That's really great. I feel like that's a good sign.
You've done it right.
Yeah.
While we're on the subject of the character drawings, I would talk about the characters as they were written, and what it was like building them out. There are some that feel very archetypal, I suppose, in terms of eldritch horror, but there are others that feel really fresh and that are maybe more specific to the story that you're trying to tell as a part of this game. So I'm wondering if you can just talk about how you built out the characters that we encounter throughout the game, and if it was where were you trying to draw from, the eldritch histories, and where was no, this is a fresh point we really want to draw from here.
I don't think at any point we directly tried to pull from Lovecraft or anything like that. There are, as you say, there are some sort of more tropey characters, like the fanatic is probably one that you can predict, or perhaps the hooded figures. But yeah, largely with the other characters, we would come up with the zone, the biome first, and then we would say, well, what's an interesting story that could have happened in this area, and which character or characters could have been involved in that. And then I think from there, typically Alex would do the portrait for those characters, and that just their faces and maybe their pose or whatever they were holding would sort of give them a bit of a voice for writing the dialogue. I think that's probably how we did it.
We always came up with more backstory and story than we ultimately put in the game as well. So that helps keep them a bit more grounded.
I would love to, we talk about this on every episode. I love the lore dump of all the backgrounds that didn't make it into the final scenes. Absolutely fascinating. The idea that you guys started with the environment and built stories from that, that feels like such a fresh way to design story and to create character. Wow.
I think that makes sense for our game, where you're kind of you're exploring the environment so much. It's kind of your main thing. So we start with that so that you have something interesting to explore, and then we get to flesh it out. And human brains are really good at just taking you see something in the environment and you already start theory crafting, and we can just use this to help create our own world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it helped us out a lot on just the game design side of things as well, because we design up the kind of the area, and then it'll be well, what do we want the player to how do we want them to interact with the environment? What sort of obstacles might they come across? And then when we got all those sort of obstacles, it's all right, now how is a character going to tell you or help you deal with these particular obstacles? And then so all those things kind of all blend together, and they just start forming up all right, now that's what this character would be like, because he has to deal with all these things in the swamp and stuff like that, for example.
Yeah, it was a matter of keeping each of the biomes and environments fresh for players, not just visually, but in the way that you move around, right? So the way that you exist in Stellar Basin, for example, which is a really nice open space, is quite different from the way you exist in Twisted Strand, which is this maze-like, very foggy, oppressive area. And yeah, just keeping it fresh in all ways that we could.
This might be a little bit embarrassing to tell on myself in this way. Very early in the game, you meet the builder, and she's this very nice character, and you're doing her a favor. I probably went and visited the builder in between every quest, just as like a point. I was like, I know there's not like a romance thing that's really happening here, but I was just like, there's this spark of hope that was like, maybe there's some comfort I'm gonna get from one of these characters, and this is gonna be it. And like, if I keep going there enough.
You're not the only one.
Yeah.
We've definitely seen other players do that. Yep.
Yeah. I think there is like arguments to create some sort of dating sim based off the Dredge universe anyway.
You need to date the fishmonger.
Yeah, date the fishmonger. I think for what was it? Was it for Valentine's Day?
Oh,
we
yeah, we
made
did.
we did like a social media post and we did like a Tinder profile for the fishmonger.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to have to scroll back to
We're going
find
to find that and repost it. That's incredible.
The internet is thirsty. What can we say?
Oh man.
Oh my gosh. But going back to the narrative, I really appreciated the way that the game allowed me to immerse myself in sort of role playing as this fisherman, where I almost didn't catch the narrative until it's like too late, where I was picking up these bottles and I'm like, oh, there's this interesting, notes in a bottle. And the way that the game encouraged me as a player to start putting the pieces together myself rather than having like, here's the start of the story, here's the quest that will tell you the next step, and here's the quest that will tell you the next step. Finding things organically. We were talking actually right before this call, and I was saying how it really compared to Outer Wilds for me, which is like, I loved the way that the game puts you in a space and it's very much about the universe more so than here is the specific story we're about to tell, at least on the front of the game. And so I'm curious, what are some of the strategies, because finding those notes in a bottle can feel a bit random and it's not overt. And so what are some of the ways you designed and encouraged players to start putting those pieces together?
I think perhaps it's that we sort of designed the story in layers. Originally, Dredge was not supposed to be so story focused. It was going to be more of just a fishing exploration game. But we had created this vibe, right, with the day-night and the fog and this sort of unsettling atmosphere. This vibe made players want to know more. So we started writing more and more and more, and that's sort of how we built it up. And at some point we added messages in a bottle, which, because we had sort of sat on the story for a while, we could sort of fill in gaps with these messages. And then at a later point we added the glowing rocks that give you sort of extra information. That was reasonably late in development, actually, that we added those, just to sort of fill in extra gaps for players who figured out how to interact with them. So I guess the way we developed it is kind of the way that players experience it, which is getting bits of different layers and then trying to put it all together. And we definitely wanted that experience of not just pages of text saying this is what happened, but sort of an investigation board of lines linking this character to this character. That was our goal, I guess.
Yeah, we once we kind of had an idea of the story that we were going to put into the game, I remember we actually had, because we had so many story conversations to work it out, but we had a conversation that was like, where we had, and maybe this approach is like a bad way to do it, but it worked out really well, where we were like, we decided we were kind of okay with maybe the majority of players getting to the end of the game and not knowing what happened if you didn't look deeper. And we were like, because if you don't really search for what's actually happening in the game, you can very well get to the end of the game and be quite confused. And we were like, we kind of like that, but if you go back, you'll find enough answers, I think, to hopefully satisfy you and maybe get your brain working and filling in gaps. And I think we decided that that's kind of what we wanted. And who knows if maybe that's upset some people, but but it's good.
I will say, we were also talking about this right before the call, and I'm on my second playthrough. I played through it once, and then I used that point of no return to try both, like the different endings. And then I've started another playthrough just to like feel it out. And I was telling Joel, upon the second playthrough, in some ways the mechanics are just as great, but the narrative is almost more rewarding than the first time because, exactly as you said, I'm starting to see these details and the breadcrumbs in ways that I did not recognize before. And I personally love when I'm able to revisit a game and a world and replay it and feel like I'm getting more out of it that second time around.
Yeah, we have longtime listeners of this show will know that every time I play a game, I miss really obvious things that are just right there. And so like I'm collecting these bottles the whole way through. I'm reading the notes, and then I got to the end. We won't talk about what happens at the end of the game, but it wasn't until Jenny and I were talking today that she's like, "Well, yeah, those bottles are what kind of help you understand before you get to the end game." And I was like, oh my gosh, this whole time, like, I mean...
It's not just a fishing game. What?
So, like, to your point, though, I had a great time playing this game. And, like, I did hit some important plot points before the end game to let me know kind of what was happening here. But you've made this game so engaging from, like, a mechanical standpoint, from the environments that you created. It's actually really encouraging to hear how much of this game began with an environment.
Yeah.
And then you work the details out of that because it I guess atmospheric is the word. Like you feel that atmosphere in every space that you are in, and both the characters, the story, the types of fish you're catching, the way you have to catch them, all contribute to that sense while you're in that space. So like, hats off, like absolutely incredible experience there.
Yeah. Okay. This is a little bit switching gears, but I would love to talk about the mechanics, because I think if there's anything that's like more of a vibe, it's and folks who got the newsletter last week know I said it, I really don't like fishing games. I did not like fishing mini games. This is one of the games that has really changed my opinion. And I think because you did something really important where you captured this feeling of fishing and the flow that I imagine you would get if you were a fisherman and you liked fishing, but it did not have the specifics of fishing, which I realized that's what kind of knocked it out for me with every other fishing mini game or full game. And so I'd love to know how you thought through the fishing mechanic, because it's so fun.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So I guess we started with a central goal of the fishing minigame should not be frustrating. In my experience, there are too many great games out there that have fishing minigames that are just weirdly frustrating. I'm going to cite Stardew Valley in particular, which is a game I absolutely love, but I've almost thrown my Switch across the room trying to catch those legendary fish. And just keeping it as accessible as possible as well. We didn't set out to make a hard game, a frustrating game. So you might notice that in the fishing minigame, you actually don't have to interact with it. You can just sort of let it go. It'll take you more time, and time is valuable to you as someone who wants to get home before dark. But yeah, so we didn't want to make it frustrating. And we did early on try some experiments with a more fishing-like minigame with like line tension and fish strength and stuff, and it was just too complicated and it didn't really need to exist.
Yeah, I think one of the really cool... Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I think one of the really cool things we managed to pull off with it was just because it's a very simple sort of fishing interaction mechanic. You just tapping, it's more like a rhythm game sort of thing as well. But yeah, like Joe mentioned, the important thing is that time side of things as well. And it's just so easy. It's this is easy. I'm just catching all these things, and then you're not paying attention to the time because time only moves when you're moving or fishing. And then so you think, oh, this is fine. I've gone out fishing in the morning, and then when you've done, you've fished up the entire spot, you look up the time oh no, it's already 6 o'clock and it's going to get dark soon. And then so it's changing the camera camera angle down, it just it hides up, so you're just kind of in that fishing zone, which it kind of feels like you end up doing when you do go out fishing, when time just passes when you're not really aware of how long you've actually been out there for. And so that got captured pretty well with, I think, the kind of simple interactions that we kind of had.
I think we actually had our priorities straight with where we were going with the fishing right from the beginning, because our original prototype for Dredge had all of the things you'll recognize, like the day-night cycle, coming back to town to upgrade your boat. But the fishing in the original prototype for Dredge was even simpler. It was you go to a fishing spot, you hold down a button, and you get the fish. And all it did was just take a little bit of time. And even right from the beginning, it was already somewhat engaging, just going to the fishing spots, getting the fish by holding down a button, and then going out into the fog and exploring.
Yeah, it was you pointed out something that I did not consciously notice as a player, but now that you say it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that camera angle.
I just thought the same thing.
I am just like, that's also why, because you're not seeing the wide expanse, you're not worried about what could be coming on the horizon. You're just focused, you're just vibing. You're just you on your boat, fishing, living your best life. And then yeah, you look up from your relaxing, cozy time, and all of a sudden you're just like, oh my gosh, I think maybe something might be coming for me, and I can see it in the distance.
Well, and if something starts attacking you while your camera's down, it's like it's already too late. Like you were in the zone for too long, my friend.
We try to give people audio cues and other visual cues while that camera is down. You know, there might be something roaring in the distance getting closer, or the screen might be having an effect on it, but people don't notice. You know, they get attacked and they go, oh, what was that? And it's still a good moment, I think.
Well, it's the magpie thing, right? Like,
right.
I was so close, like, just 2 more spins of that wheel and I'm going to make it. I know there's something coming, but I'm so close.
I'm curious, were you expecting the sort of connection and juxtaposition between cozy and horror that I've been seeing a lot in the media, and also with like players? You know, I follow a lot of streamers who typically play cozy games. They don't play horror, but all of them were playing Dredge. And so I'm curious if this was something you planned for and you're like, yes, we are aiming for both horror fans and, you know, cozy game fans, or if this is something that surprised you.
I think specifically the cozy game bit that kind of did surprise us. I mean, we knew we weren't making a pure horror game, because half the game is kind of pleasant. But for some reason, we never actually made the cozy connection. I guess we thought because of the themes that maybe it wouldn't be received that way. But it's in hindsight, it's like completely obvious.
Yeah, I think even from the get-go, we kind of struggled to like really nail down what genre this game would kind of actually fall into as it was, because we're just like, here's a really cool idea. It straddles the line of kind of like this fun, like easygoing, like adventure sort of game, but it's also got like some spooky stuff to it as well. We might annoy or offend people, just scare people off from going one way or the other. If it's like, I like the horror bit, but I don't want to deal with any of the kind of like the cheesy stuff. Or it's like, I love that stuff, but I don't want to deal with that horror side of things. So when it came down, when we released everything, like we were always kind of nervous, like, are people going to actually like this game as well? Because it's a weird one. Because it's just like, yeah, it almost feels like it's its own little niche little genre. And I guess whenever you make something niche, you're never really sure how well or who's going to really kind of like latch onto that kind of feel of game, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that uncertainty around exactly how many people are going to like this game, this kind of weird new genre mashup we made, that, you know, comes through in why we kept the fishing minigames so sort of open and as accessible as we could, and also why we allowed players to opt in to how much horror they wanted and not force you out at night, just trying to keep things as flexible and as open as possible to hit as many different types of players as we could.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating for me to explore and like think about, again, as someone who actually now I'm like, I don't enjoy fishing and I don't typically enjoy horror. So it's been a real interesting time for me, self-reflection playing this game.
People do love watching you play horror, though. It's actually incredibly entertaining if you ever watch Jenny stream a horror game.
Oh, gosh.
Speaking of, I think we'd be remiss not to ask this.
Yeah.
This is one of the questions that we've been asking our community that they've been chiming in on.
Mm-hmm.
And that is this question of how you come to define or appreciate what makes horror effective.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe did I phrase that in an okay way?
I think you did.
Okay.
Yeah.
What makes a compelling horror, I suppose?
The most interesting aspect of horror for me, I'm not sure about you guys as well, it is the atmosphere. Like, we're not really horror gamers ourselves, but yeah, that tension and the atmosphere that comes before the jump scare is really cool, and that's the kind of part that we wanted. Not necessarily the jump scare. There are still things that will scare you in the game, but yeah, building on that atmosphere that we've talked about before.
Yeah, it was like how you said earlier with the panic eye and being and creating a sense of tension. That's the main part of any horror that I'm interested in, is the tension and mystery, I guess. And yeah, less so any kind of jump scares. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, it's exactly that, like what they will mention. Because I think once you've actually seen the creature and then everything as well, it just kind of like, it has that kind of like diminishing return on the amount of like fear you get from it, because you get used to what it's kind of doing. But when you don't know what's going to happen next, and then that's what keeps people on the edge of their seats, and then that's the sort of thing that we keep trying to fall back on.
Yeah, definitely. That you did a great job of developing that tension, I will tell you that.
And I will add that in kind of the lava-y area, the creatures that you encounter there were scary for me the entire time I was there. There was never a point where I was like, oh, I got these guys figured out.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We haven't talked at all about the music, and I really wanted to touch on that and like the sound design, because I think you did some really interesting things there. I'm really curious just how you went about creating a soundtrack for a game like this, because again, as you're building tension, the sound design is what can really make or break the immersion in that feeling. So yeah, how did you go about doing that?
So we did not actually compose the soundtrack. Our composer is a guy called David Mason, and he composed this amazing 70-track soundtrack for us. But I guess we could maybe talk about like the way we wanted to use the music, and that was, I guess, to create this sort of sparse and sort of isolated feelings in the player. You know, the music doesn't play all of the time. It plays in sort of brief stingers that only last for sort of 30 to 40 seconds. And it might play a couple or 3 times a day in game time. And it doesn't play at night as well, because, you know, we sort of let the sounds of the deep do the talking in that time of day. So yeah, we had a sort of a deliberate choice of where and when we wanted music to play.
My word. I'm a fan of like the pirate music genre, like that Modest Mouse, like I have my squeeze box and I'm like doing a jig. Like I'm a fan of that, and like there are moments where you get like those little stingers, I guess that's the right word for it, like where you hear that and you're like, oh yeah, I'm playing a fishing game and I'm doing fishing. And then there are times where it's just twisted enough that you're just like, oh man, I'm not comfortable with this right now.
So good. Well, and just the sounds of the ocean too. It was pretty incredible how sometimes the sound of the ocean was like relaxing. I'm fishing. This is a great, wonderful time. And then at times when you hear the waves swell and you're like, this is no good could come of this sound that's about to happen right now.
Yeah, we actually like ramp up a different sound layer that is like deep ocean waves. The deeper you go, so sound will sort of subconsciously change. And there are other things we do as well, like as you sail over a fishing spot, if it's mackerel or something small, we play these sort of small sound effects of fish gurgling in the water, and then you sail over some sharks or something, and it's this really ominous, scary sound. I think we've had players who like sail over them and say, oh, I actually don't want to fish that because it sounds bad, and just drive away.
That's really great. I think actually that was one of my first reactions, was like, do I have to do this right now, or do I need to like get shark stuff?
I think I spent the first like literal 20 days of the game just going back and forth between big and little Marrows. Like, I think if I just stay here the whole time, I'm gonna have a really pleasant fishing game experience.
We've pretty much come to the end of our conversation. I'm curious if there's any last thoughts that you're wanting to share, either about the game, what you hope players get out of it, or just about launch itself before we wind down.
I guess I just hope that players have a good time and play the game the way that they want to play it. We've deliberately constructed it so that it's flexible, as we've talked about, and yeah, I think it's a game that can hit a wide audience. So if you're into fishing games, if you're into sort of spooky atmosphere, give it a go.
Yeah, I've got nothing extra to add. That was good.
Yeah, and then but nothing else to add to that. And then just like for everyone that has actually already been playing through, it's just like been awesome to kind of just see the response that we've been getting. It just makes it feel like all that hard work was actually worth it in the end and everything as well. So to kind of get that validation, it's like, oh man, that's cool when people are like, yeah, you guys are awesome stuff. I'm like, oh, cool. I'm not crazy. We actually did a good thing here, so it works out in the end. Yeah.
Y'all should be really proud.
Yeah.
It's incredible. We didn't even touch on, because I also do production and some of the design choices you make, and I would love to see some of the scope documents and just the production. Just fascinating. So
The file size at download,
yeah, I'm like, how
the
optimized
things that
is
you
this
guys
game?
were able to pull off here, really incredible.
Yeah. But that I'm sure people probably don't want to hear us nerding out over like production details. I think it's the least cool thing you could talk about, but I love. Where can folks find you, find your communities if they wanted to just like really dive in?
So there's a growing subreddit for Dredge, as well as a pretty large Discord. You can find links to our Discord on most of our socials. So we are Black Salt Games on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, pretty much everything. And you can find the three of us on Twitter at BSG_Joel or _Alex or _Mikey.
It'll be Michael because there's already someone that was BSG Mikey and he's a different person. It's not me.
BSG Michael.
We're just going to start spamming that other person with a bunch of Dredge
know.
content.
It's like, what is this? Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to talk to us again. This was so much fun. Big fans of what you all do. Can't wait to see what you do next after you get a nice long rest to just enjoy post-launch and all of that good stuff. And yeah, really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us as we had our conversation with the Dredge team from Black Salt Games. Thanks so much to the Black Salt team for joining us. It was so fun getting to chat with you. Jenny, where can people find you?
Folks can find me on Twitch, TikTok, and YouTube at Kimchica, and folks can find Geeks and Grounds at geeksandgrounds.com. Where can folks find you, Joel?
You can find me at My Grand Falloon. One thing we'd love to ask you to consider at this point, we've been getting into the Geeks and Grounds podcast world, YouTube world for a few months now. And if you're a listener, part of our community, we'd love it if you'd be willing to rate us, review us on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you happen to be engaging with us.
Yes, it's super helpful. And if you enjoy it, we'd love to hear from you. And also, I wanted to shout out, if you are listening to this podcast sort of as it's coming out, we do have our monthly hangout. So if you do like to participate in sort of Discord and community discussions, you can join the Discord, and the hangout is happening. Let me gather the date in this very prepared portion of the podcast that definitely I rehearsed. May 20th.
May 20th.
Hold up.
No,
It's not.
it's not that.
I don't know. What is life? It's May 27th.
It's the 27th.
Yeah. That was a bit of a roller coaster ride that I wanted to take you on. My building of tension.
Yes, we're building an atmosphere.
Trying to apply these lessons about horror to.
Are you feeling scared?
Yeah. Do you want to play a game?
Do you want to play a game?
So yes, May 27th. So we actually have just over a week until our hangout if you would like to join it. It's super casual. You could even come just to enjoy the atmosphere and the vibes.
Ooh, join for the vibes.
And if you would like to talk, wonderful. We'd love to hear from you. But again, for folks who want to have the community aspect of Geeks and Grounds, we are here for you. And you can find all that information in the newsletter and sign up at geeksandgrounds.com.
Well, from all of us at Geeks and Grounds, if the boat is a rockin', you need to leave. You need to go.
It's time to get out.
It's time to get out.
It's time to swing.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.